The FY25 budget request for the Air Force and the Space Force represents about a 2% increase.
We got to do better than just saying, well, the more legs, the better. Well, at a certain point, no.
The one that I think we're going to look at very closely is the 15% pay raise for junior enlisted.
That report was unfortunately due on March 30th. Today is beyond March 30th.
If you can decrease the time it takes to have someone who wants to be naturalized become a citizen, that attracts people in. If you can understand the height and weight measurement that was required to even be considered, and you can relax that.
The F-35 is our signature Air Force platform. What percentage of them are fully mission capable today?
55%.
Do you think that's a good number or a bad number?
I think that's not a good number. We did not acquire the intellectual property to allow the government to come in and step in and control the program.
The government isn't running this program. Lockheed Martin's running this program.
How much do you think the Air Force pays for this bag of bushings?
I don't know, Congressman.
$90,000.
You take a sword and just cut through the red tape.
The FY25 budget request for the Air Force and the Space Force represents about a 2% increase over FY24. But when you account for inflation, that increase is actually a cut. And that means tough decisions had to be made about what programs to cut and what level of risk to absorb. And like we heard from the Army yesterday, it means the Air Force and Space Force are forced to absorb a lot of risk in the near future as they try to keep delivery of out-year capabilities on track. Now I'd like to introduce our witnesses today. We have the Honorable Frank Kendall, Secretary of the Air Force, General Chance Saltzman, Chief of Space Operations, and General David Allvin is the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. We've talked about the tight fiscal top line and that there's going to be some risk that you have to assume making these numbers work, particularly when it comes to our ability to effectively deter China, Russia, and Iran. Can you talk briefly about some of the risks that you're assuming with this?
Yeah, I outlined it in my opening comment a little bit, but first thing is that we have the most powerful military in the world, and we're going to continue to have the most powerful military in the world. So we are able to meet the requirements of our combatant commanders and provide them forces that they would need, both in normal operations and in a contingency. But that's being challenged, of course, by China in particular. And that's a lot for us to do simultaneously. There are a lot of commitments the United States has around the world. So we have, basically what we have done under the constraints of the Fiscal Responsibility Act is to fund the current force, personnel with an adequate raise, maintaining quality of life for people, maintaining the force structure basically that we have at a level which we think is acceptable risk. A floor below which we really do not want to go.
On your triad argument, I don't find that overwhelmingly persuasive, okay? If we have 3 legs, we're better off. Well, why not 4 or 5? Okay, yes, the more legs you have, theoretically, the better off you are. That doesn't necessarily answer the question of why this particular leg in this particular situation actually puts us in a better position to defend when it is stationary and just a big fat target. So we got to do better than just saying, well, the more legs, the better. Well, at a certain point, no. So we've got to get a more specific answer, and I think General Allvin wants to dive in here.
The danger,
why is this leg helpful, other than just being another leg?
The risk of a preemptive surprise attack that decapitates us or takes out our nuclear force becomes much higher if there's no ICBM leg. If the stealth of the submarines is broken and the bombers are caught on their bases, you don't have anything left. I'm an old Cold Warrior. I spent 20 years working on this problem. We've looked at tons of scenarios. We've looked at all sorts of different opportunities and possibilities. The triad provides the most stable configuration. And it would be, I think, a lot of risk, more risk than we should accept to take that.
I am out of time. I want to respect the chairman. I apologize, General Allvin. You and I can talk about this offline. Thank you.
Talked quite a bit publicly about sort of the challenge right now we have with early warning platforms. The E3s are getting old. The economic business case for, extending them is pretty weak. The E7 is a really promising, more than promising replacement. Australia is already flying them. I think we're selling some already to the UK, sort of where AUKUS is now in a situation where the other 2 countries are ahead of us. Is there something this committee can do to help accelerate, either through multi-year authorities or AP, to sort of get the timeline shorter so that we can start fielding these E7s.
And where we are with E7 is that we're still in negotiations with the prime contractor to try to get to an affordable price that we think is reasonable. We're getting closer. I'm hopeful that we will get there soon. As a result of those negotiations going on longer than anticipated, we've taken one E7 out of the budget and slipped it a year. It's one of the cuts in procurement this year, driven more by the fact that we couldn't get to an acceptable business deal. I think the odds are pretty good that we will get there, hopefully in the not too distant future.
Can you speak to the importance of the CASR program, the Commercial Augmentation Space Reserve program, how you see it today, what you think the future is for that, and what do you think needs to go into the structure of that to make sure we can capture the incredible things that are happening on the commercial side of space and do that at the speed of relevance?
Thank you, Congressman. I couldn't agree with you more. We definitely need to leverage what's available to us in the commercial industry for space. The CASR program, I think, is a classic example where we've used this in the Air Force prior to it. And the idea is about how rapidly can we expand and augment our capabilities in time of crisis or conflict. And as you know, a lot of the pre-work, the planning, how will we integrate the contractual work that needs to be done with the companies to make sure that we're primed to execute at the speed of need is really what is at the heart of the CASR program. Do the work ahead of time, account for it in planning, see what the requirements are, which of those requirements can be met by the commercial industry, and then start talking about contract negotiations before we even actually sign a contract so that we are ready and primed to put that excess capacity in place when we need it.
General Saltzman, the fiscal year 24 budget included $80 million for a payload processing facility that is supposed to go to Vandenberg. Can you provide an update on this project, including any timelines involved?
I can get back to you on the specifics, but I haven't heard anything that says there's any delays or that the money's not being spent. But I'll get back to you specifically.
What are your goals for ABMS? Are you staying on track with the timeline? What can we do to help with the Air Force mission and the ABMS mission at Robins Air Force Base?
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Congressman. I would say that the advancement in the advanced battle management system and really across what we're referring to as the C3 battle management has really started to accelerate, largely due to something Secretary Kendall did maybe a year and a half ago now, with the putting an integrator in across all those systems that's putting together the architecture. It's a complicated thing. But when you put it together, having all of the architecture, understanding what the pipes are, what the nodes are, and how it all fits together, and for it to have the ability to work with the other services, so it can truly integrate into the joint environment. That is where we've been making progress. We are now seeing some instantiations of that. We are seeing in the Homeland Defense area, some of the cloud-based command and control is now moving to 4 or 5 different defense sectors. We are deploying, I believe we have now as many as 20 this year of these distributable air battle management nodes. So this idea of moving to a distributed architecture to do what we had done before is progressing along. There will continue to be bumps along the road, but I feel very confident in General Cropsey and the team that he has, mixing the technical folks with the operators side by side, step by step, to ensure that we build this once right the first time.
There were 5 categories, not surprisingly: service member pay, spouse employment, child care, housing, and health care. Very quickly, if you wouldn't mind mentioning kind of which one of those resonates most with you at this point in time, and how you're currently prioritizing the funding in that area.
The department's looking at it, just came out recently. I had a chance to look at it also. A couple of things we are doing and are reflected in our 25 budget. The 200% of poverty for basic needs allowance, for example. We obviously support that. The one that I think we're going to look at very closely is the 15% pay raise for junior enlisted. We have given a 15% pay raise over the last few years when you add the totals to the last few years. When you look at how resources could be applied to influence quality of life for our people, we think there may be some more efficient ways to do that, to utilize those same funds. So anyway, I know there'll be a conversation between you and the department as we look at this in more detail and get back to you. So that's just preliminary reactions.
Secretary Kendall. The Department of the Air Force published the assessment of the Air Force Test Center in 2022, which found that $300 million of facilities, sustainment, restoration, modernization projects have not been funded. Can you describe the impact and operational risk associated with such an extensive backlog, and how would failure of our critical test infrastructure impact modernization efforts for everything from Sentinel to hypersonics to F-35 upgrades?
We are managing the risk associated with our installations at a level which we think is acceptable, but it's not great. I look at that as we look at the foundational accounts that we fund, including facilities. We're funding, I think, at 1.6% of replacement cost. We'd like to be at 2%. What that leads to is slow deterioration. And eventually you end up doing emergency repairs only in some of our installations.
In relation to that issue, I co-led an amendment last year in the NDAA that requires the Air Force to submit a fighter recapitalization plan. That report was unfortunately due on March 30th. Today is beyond March 30th. Can you help us understand when we'll get that plan?
General Allvin and I have reviewed the final draft. It's very close to coming over. It should be over here as soon as we finish coordination on it.
Okay. That report is very important to a number of us, both in the House and the Senate, to understand your planning. And I think, per your comments, if we want to maintain a strong deterrent against China, we need to make sure we have fighters in the air that can do that and fighters at the ready to do that.
At what point is our Air Force and Space Force too small to deter China?
To be direct about this, Congressman Bacon, my concern is more about quality than quantity. We are taking out some marginal force structure of our oldest aircraft. We're divesting some more this year. But getting to the quality we need to be competitive is really my first priority.
After falling short in 2023 for the first time since 1999 in your recruitment goals, the Air Force is on pace to reach those goals for 2024. What changed?
Well, thank you for that, Congressman. We really attacked this aggressively when we saw the downslide happening, and we looked at several things. We looked at our policies to ensure that they were still relevant. We looked at some things that maybe we were being overly restrictive of, so we did a clean sweep of that. A couple things that were sort of as easy as falling off a log. Why, if you can decrease the time it takes to have someone who wants to be naturalized become a citizen, that attracts people in. If you can understand the height and weight measurement that was required to even be considered, and you can relax that to where it's consistent with the rest of the DoD standards, those are some simple things we did. But some other things that we're doing to follow up on that is we're ensuring that we can have the recruiters do more of the pounding the shoe leather time and not doing as much admin time. So there were several things we did, a little bit more targeted marketing, reaching out to other things. So it was really attacking on all fronts. And I think that, plus the fact that we're coming out of COVID and people are starting to wake up again and we're engaging. We put notes out to our wing commanders to get out to the community so people can actually see what their military can do for them. I think it was the compilation of all of those things that put us on the right path, and now we're making sure that we just don't rest on those laurels, and we're looking into the future to make sure we can sustain that.
I'm trying to get a better understanding of where we're scaled to, given this very concerning rising threat.
Defense against hypersonics is important to us because there are a lot of hypersonic weapons potentially targeting our air bases in particular. The responsibility for that largely falls on the Missile Defense Agency and on the Army. What we are doing to contribute to that, in particular, is our space-based missile warning system that we're deploying, which will support an overall architecture of hypersonic defense, particularly against some of the intermediate and longer range threats.
The F-35 is our signature Air Force platform. What percentage of them are fully mission capable today? Mr. Secretary.
Congressman, if you give me a second, I'm going to pull up my card and give you an exact answer.
Okay. Happy to.
Your eyes are probably better than mine. 55% is the number we have for operational availability.
Full operationally capable.
55% for
Is that,
operational
do you think that's a good number or a bad number?
I think that's not a good number.
Failing.
I wouldn't put it quite in that category.
A D?
I'd ask General Allvin to comment on that. It's a number we'd like to see something.
Yeah, well, the reason I ask is because we got testimony that is a little contrary to that. Lieutenant General Schmidt, head of the F-35 program, gave testimony to the TAL subcommittee at HASC, and that testimony was that as of February of 2023, so a little over a year ago, only 29% were fully mission capable.
I think we need to talk difference between operational availability
Okay.
and mission capable.
Okay, so how many are fully mission capable today?
I do not have that number, but I would not dispute what the JPO has in front. And I would look
29%. So fully mission capable, 29%. You have no basis to dispute that, but you don't really know if it's true or false.
I have no basis to dispute it, but I would like to.
So you would agree that if 55% is like a D, that 29% is definitely failing, right?
For fully mission capable, but
Yeah,
the
so, I
missions
mean,
that they can accomplish.
I go meet with the folks at the 33rd at Eglin Air Force Base in the district I represent, and they're doing a lot of, there's a lot of mission there, but like even the guys who are also at Eglin doing test, they end up being at the very end, right? And I totally get why you want your operational squadrons to be the most capable, but then test gets put to the end, and then we're not meeting our needs. Like, I just think anyone watching this, one, would be surprised that you, General, don't know the exact percentage that are operationally capable. And two, I think people would be surprised that it's 29%. And this GAO report that I found on breakingdefense.com that I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record, it says that the reason we are not capable is because you guys at the Pentagon have given too much power to Lockheed Martin and its subcontractors for sustainment. Do you believe Lockheed Martin has been given too much power on the sustainment of the F-35?
I believe that Lockheed Martin has more power than in some other weapon systems. They do have the contracted logistics system that was part of the procurement plan that was put in place 20 or some years ago.
Well, right, I mean, but it's not working. If the Lockheed Martin built the F-35, only 29% of them are fully operationally capable right now. We've all agreed that's failing. So now the question is, why is it failing? And this GAO report says the reason it's failing is because the fox is watching the hen house. Because the very contractor bilking the taxpayer for this platform is now in a position where they can't sustain it. Do you have a basis to disagree with that conclusion?
I have a long history with the F-35, and I inherited the program. I came into it in 2010. It was a few years into production at that point. And the first time I saw the program laid out, the schedule for it and so on, and when the decisions and points were going to be, the question I asked, and I'm going to quote myself, who's running this program, the government or Lockheed Martin? That's a quote from 2010.
I think you have your answer, Mr. Secretary.
And we set up the program, and it was originally set up under a philosophy of management called total system performance, which essentially gave to the prime contractor complete control of the program. We did not acquire the intellectual property to allow the government to come in and step in and control the program.
It sounds like
we are still fighting that problem today.
Well, right, but that is such important testimony for us to hear. Every member of the committee heard that. The government isn't running this program. Lockheed Martin's running this program.
That was a question I asked.
Well, it sounds like you got the answer. What's the answer to the question, Mr. Secretary? Because only 29% of them are operationally capable.
We took a lot of steps to try to get that under control. I once imposed a production contract on Lockheed. I dictated a price to them because we couldn't get a negotiation done. I did a unilateral contract. Let them take me to court if they wanted to. They chose not to. Put in place program managers who were very firm with the contractor and insisted on performance. We've had some conversations with the current head of the JPO, and we've had conversations with the CEO of Lockheed.
I appreciate those conversations. I've always found you to be the truth teller. You're always very honest with the committee and straightforward. The problem is the tail here is wagging the dog, and it's not going to get better unless there's accountability for the fact that their planes don't fly.
Now, I recently heard from base leadership that despite the improvements ongoing at Holloman, we're still facing a housing shortage of about 1,100 people. Does the Air Force have plans to increase collaboration with the city of Alamogordo, with local nonprofits, and with other entities to construct additional housing? And if not, what steps are you taking to address this issue to make sure that the readiness of our airmen and women and their families is met with the dignity that they deserve to have adequate housing?
We'll work with the community to address that concern. I don't know that that's happened yet. I was not aware of the problem at Holloman and or at Alamogordo specifically. There is a housing requirement to market analysis going to be conducted this summer, and I think we can use that as a basis by which to move forward with the community. We should have it to you very shortly.
Mr. Secretary, if it's in final draft, we're hitting print on the page here, the computer, whatever we're doing, can you share with us, since it's on the way, what criteria has been used to determine taking away a squadron at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base?
It's a longer conversation about the mix of the fighter force, the cost effectiveness of every element, the set of capabilities we have to have, and the cost of any modernization that would be required to keep the aircraft current. And then, of course, total resources available to the department. So we have for some time known we had taken
Well, Mr. Secretary, I look forward to seeing this report soon, really soon. And yes or no, do you believe when there is a required report and you're submitting a budget that the report maybe could help inform us?
I do agree with that. You'll have the report very shortly.
Mr. Secretary, I was struck by a statement you just made, and I just want to touch on Representative Gates's concern about readiness. I'm the chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee. I mean, I understand there is a quality over quantity argument. But the basic issue is if they can't fly, that is a strategic failing on our part. And I think the Pentagon has become so focused on, I know it's a balance, I know there's a pendulum swing, but on making these kind of handmade, bespoke, high-tech Ferraris, but sometimes you need a fleet of pickup trucks. And you certainly need, whether they're Ferraris or pickup trucks, that can operate in the desert and can operate out in the corrosive environment in the Pacific. So let's talk about some of your pickup trucks. The Air Force owns and operates DOD's largest fleet of commercial derivative aircraft. They use commercial parts. This, Mr. Secretary, is a bag of bushings. This bag of bushings, stamped out by machinists, they need a high school diploma. It's not anything high tech about this. All of this bag is compliant with the FAA specifications. How much do you think the Air Force pays for this bag of bushings?
I don't know, Congressman.
$90,000. This is a $90,000 bag of bushings that you need for any jet turbine engine just to operate. So the exorbitant cost due to DOD only buying commercial parts from the OEMs, which is essentially sole source, is literally driving us out of business. I mean, the interest on our debt alone is now exceeding, for the first time in American history, the entire defense budget. We can't afford it anymore.
How is the Air Force managing and adapting to the risks inherent in infrastructure sustainment challenges in the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, General Allvin, I got to see a lot of that firsthand. We visited Tinian, which is one of our hubs, our spokes rather, our more remote bases that we're in the process of clearing and repaving so that we can use that strip. Under the operational imperative initiatives from 2 years ago, which the committee supported and were funded starting largely in '24, we do have a lot of money allocated to this purpose, upgrading our facilities in the region so that they can support the operational concept we have, agile combat employment. So we're moving forward. We're not moving as fast as I would like to, I think, as you would either. We are moving forward on that, a set of initiatives designed to address those problems. We're well aware of them.
What is the Air Force doing to overcome these delays and help our industry partners get the T-7 to bases like Shepherd Air Force Base more quickly, and how are we ensuring that we end this never-ending cycle of bad news on our new platforms like the T-7 trainer aircraft? Can you commit to me here that we will get these jets to Shepherd Air Force Base as quickly as we possibly can?
Congressman, I'll start with the end one. Yes, as soon as we possibly can. We continue to work with Boeing and the T-7 unit. It's now in flight test, so we continue to move on. And as a former test pilot, I would hesitate to say that guarantees things are going to go as smoothly. Sometimes you do find things in flight tests that you hadn't before. There's a bit of the way that it was developed too, with the digital engineering being a bit new, that might cause new issues. It may allow us to go through testing more rapidly. But what General Brown said, he held to. We did put the right right people in place. We are having a laser focus on it, trying to get past issue one at a time with the T7 to ensure that we can bring that on as soon as possible. Now, in the meantime, we also understand, as you said, Congressman, we need to ensure that the T-38 can remain viable through then. And so as part of my unfunded priority list, I had what the teams do is I had our team go through a couple of sprints to look at what are the things that move the needle the most with respect to supplies to keep those J85 engine, to keep that refurbishment happening so we can keep that, which is a long pole in the tent for the T-38. So we're trying to tackle it on both ends, to be able to work with Boeing to accelerate and to do whatever we can to keep that T-38 flying so we can keep that pipeline of airmen, American and allied and partner nations as well.
And so I believe in military service and understand the uniformity that you're trying to get everybody to be the same and you shave their hair. So I'm not trying to change that. I respect that and understand why that needs to be in place. But this is obviously a very, serious issue and has affected men's careers. I have a pastor in my district that I'm trying to help. We're doing casework for him right now, trying to help him because of his discharge status, because of this issue that he had with shaving. And so just wanted to get a better understanding of how these waivers work.
Well, Congressman, we do have, and more recently, we've sort of raised the awareness of the waiver process. And so that if you have that condition and you go to see the medical professionals there at the medical treatment facilities, they grant you the verification that that's a medical condition and you're granted the waiver. And I believe the number of shaving waivers for this particular condition, I'd like to get you the exact numbers, but it's gone up by a degree of, I would say, almost 50% increase in the past several years because of the awareness of that. And so we have an increased number of shaving waivers, and we have an increased number of those who are now complying with the waived ability to have a beard.
Are you pretty confident that it's not affecting people's careers and discharge now? Have you all looked into that? Because even though someone may get a waiver, you also want to make sure that there may be someone else that's not resentful of them getting the waiver, because and we deal with this sort of stuff on this committee all the time. There's always a group of people that, well, it's been this way for 100 years and I don't understand why we got it, you know what I mean? And so when trying to work through that sort of thing can be a career impediment to someone being able to advance. And so is it something that everybody is embracing and understanding the importance of these waivers?
Yeah, Congressman, I would say it is. I would also say it's a work in progress, because along the same line, there is also an increase in requests for religious accommodation along the same lines. And so not my concern, but my interest as the chief is to ensure that we respect that and we honor that. So not only do we ensure that those who qualify for those actually achieve those the exceptions to policy and the waivers, but we also make sure that others aren't exploiting it.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure on both sides of that.
General Saltzman.
Yeah, I think General Allvin said it just right. The key is, one is having a good process to grant the waivers expeditiously and appropriately. And then second is remove any stigma and make sure that those people that are accommodated are still respected and there's no adverse impacts. That's start of that is sensitivity towards it. And then second is about training and education to make sure everybody understands the situation.
Yeah, and you feel pretty confident about the educational process making its way through the ranks so everyone has an understanding of it?
I like the way General Allvin said it. I think it's a work in progress because we got to reach the entire group of people, but I think we're making the right strides.
One, how is the U.S. Space Force working to protect America's prominence in space?
As hard as we can.
There you go.
That's the short answer. Sir, I can't tell you how important that is, and I appreciate the question. We see the execution of space capabilities as vital to not only the U.S. military, but our broader economic interests in the country as well, and to those of our foreign partners. But we are now in a contested domain, and we have to think about it differently. So what used to be relatively simple to assure in space is now complicated. So we are building more resilient architectures to account for the fact that space is contested. Secondly, our adversaries are using space against us and threatening the joint force, something I can't stand for. And so we're working hard to put counter space capabilities in place to deny our adversaries those advantages.
General Allvin, this might be for you or for the Secretary. I'll talk about the A-10s, which I don't know if that's a source of contention with you guys, but I'm a big fan of the A-10 platform. And if I'm reading it correctly, we went from discontinuing the plane in the 2030s, late 2030s to 2028, correct? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I don't think we ever had it late in the 2030s, but yeah, it currently is by the end of 28. They'll 28, 29 is when they will be divested.
I just want to be on record saying I think that is the worst idea. As someone who laid in the dirt with that plane over top of my head protecting us, I'll leave it at that. But so are we cross-training the pilots that are flying the A-10 platform and moving them over to airframes? From what I understand, we are deficient of pilots in the Air Force, correct?
We do have a pilot shortage on the staff level, but to answer to your question, Congressman, we actually are training the pilots and the maintainers, and quite frankly, part of the maintenance and operators, the pilot challenge that we have is we had intended the modernization plan to be a divestment and a modernization scale and speed. That was
just not working out very well for us.
Well, it's not because we are divesting too slow to be able to have the maintainers ready to work on the 5th generation platforms and those A-10 pilots to be able to fly those 5th generation aircraft. So we currently have a plan for every single one of those that are moving out of those to be able to, if it's there at the base on the active duty side, then we can move them. They're very mobile. We can put them into the 5th generation platform.
Why is this even a problem, and why are we facing these kinds of delays when we look at China and they're just moving so fast and overtaking us?
Well, I appreciate the question and the concern. I share the concern with some of the interagency processes that we go through. I can't speak in detail about the FAA certification process on this. I'm happy to dig into it. We do this on a number of cases where we're trying to accelerate the licensing and certification of capabilities. I'm happy to get back to you with a more specific answer from the FAA.
Would either of the two of you like to comment on this?
We'd have to look into the details of what you described. I'm not familiar with it. That type of problem does come up, and we have to work our way through, as you said, the red tape when it does. You know, there are various organizations with jurisdictions that are affected by this. I was just at Boca Chica, where SpaceX has been waiting to work with the Interior Department on some of the environmental concerns associated with launching there, and it was a significant delay. And so these things are something we just have to work through under our existing set of regulations.
Well, please work on this, because it shouldn't be any mystery why China is overtaking us when we let government agencies snarl us in red tape. And sometimes you just have to take the bull by the horns and cut through it. You know, you take a sword and just cut through the red tape.
I looked over the budget for Space Force, and it looks to me like the request doesn't even keep up with inflation. The increase of $400 million doesn't keep up with inflation. It's really a reduction in your budget as far as really what's useful. In light of the fact that China is making unbelievable strides in space, General, are you okay with this budget request?
I think the budget is making solid advancements in the resiliency of the architecture. That was our primary concern over the last couple of years, is making sure we had that capability protected so we could assure the vital effects that the Joint Force requires is always there for them. The counter space capabilities is where I think the timeline is not to my satisfaction. It's simply, it just takes time to get from the R&D phase into fielded operations. And resources can help with that, but we had to make those tough choices to make sure that our existing capabilities would be in place and available to the Joint Force, and now we're moving as fast as we can to put those counter space capabilities in place.
Yes, so talking about directed energy, which I'm also, very interested in, are you afraid that China is developing a first strike capability in space?
They're pursuing what I like to describe as 6 categories of counter space capabilities. There's a ground-based version and an on-orbit version of destructive ASATs, of RF jammers, and directed energy weapons. And the PRC is pursuing weapons in all those categories.
And with that, we are adjourned.